Hello. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Wow. Okay, so before we start, I just want you to know, I know I'm not dressed professionally wearing a t-shirt, but I wanted to show you this t-shirt. My kids bought me this. So it's a brain and it's drawn out with the names of the lobes that are in that position and stuff. I don't know if you can read it. Cerebellum, medulla oblongata, pons, midbrain. See, you couldn't wear this shirt to an exam of mine in pharmacology of recreational drugs because it would be cheating. Okay, can I see your faces real quick? Just want to know that we're all here, we're all happy. Yeah, still didn't get a haircut, did you, Mike? Good. Whose hair is longer, yours or Ariana's? Ariana, give us a little. Let's see the back of your head. How long is your hair? Hers is definitely straighter. Matt Bernhard got up 2 minutes ago. Oh, and Selena's not sharing her breakfast. Okay. Hey there, Noemi, how you doing today? Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. I may have to get. I'm at my dad's house again, and he may need me, so I may have to pause in the middle of the lecture somewhere along the way if that happens. So let's hope it doesn't. So today is autonomic pharmacology. Yay. This was a large part of my graduate school, autonomic pharmacology. Okay, so here's our opening slide. This is what we're talking about. We'll get back to the slide in a minute. This is about the anatomy of the ANS and where all these things go, but we'll get back to that. Hang on one second. Let me see everybody again. Can I see your faces real quick? I want to get a show of hands. Oh, there's Vizuit. Okay, so how many of you have done the autonomic nervous system in a different class, like A&P or something? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You ever feel like college is like the same class over and over again? We cover certain things many, many times, but hopefully I can give you something new here, something that you haven't seen before. So this has been a crazy, crazy week for me. Didn't have time to write notes out because of all the stuff going on. So a lot of the first half of the lecture anyway is from this website, and the link is there. So a lot of it I just cut and pasted from the website. So up front, this is my citation. So I'm not saying I wrote this, okay? Okay, what does the ANS do? It's housekeeping, basically, keeping all the unconscious things your body does to keep you going, minute to minute, second to second, just so you don't have to worry about it. It's kind of like your mother, you know, taking care of stuff for you. That's going to end pretty soon, people. So anyway, especially in terms of blood pressure, you really have second to second or even split second changes in your blood pressure, or pressure in different parts of your body to adapt to different metabolic needs in different places. And blood pressure is especially important for your brain. If the pressure drops, the blood flow stops, you don't have oxygen, you pass out. And then you'll come back too, because once you lay down, your blood pressure will equalize. But you know, that's not a good thing to happen when a bear's chasing you. So where was I going with that? Oh, so one of the things I always like to talk about in terms of the blood pressure regulation is the postural hypotension. I don't know if you ever heard of postural hypotension, but it's basically that feeling you get when you're laying down and you jump up really quick and it feels like the blood's running out of your brain. And that's because the blood is running out of your brain, right? Blood is a fluid, and so that when the angle of your body changes, the pressure on it changes, and then it's harder to get up to your brain. So immediately your sympathetic nervous system kicks in and squeezes those arteries and keeps the blood going up to your brain. So it's very important. It happens all the time. So other things, metabolism, okay, digestion, endocrine secretions, pupil diameter, and this is one that was always really kind of historically important because it was an easy thing to play with, right? You just put some drops in someone's eye and you can see it change. Urination, which we all do, and sexual arousal. Okay, so where are we? Central nervous system is, your brain and your spinal cord. And that is separated from your peripheral nervous system, which is all the inputs into your brain from the world. So you've got in your spine, you've got two ways for information to get in: the dorsal side by your back, the ventral side by your front. So basically information comes in the dorsal root and goes out the ventral root. So the dorsal root is this side over here, and we call that afferents or afferents. How does this affect you? This is the way I always remember it. I used to always screw these two words up. But the way I remember it now is how does this affect you? How do you feel about this? This is something coming into you. How does this affect me? How do you affect the world? That's effect. So affect is how you feel. Effect is what you do. So afferents are bringing sensory information into your system through the dorsal root, and efferents are taking information back out through the ventral root. And in our afferents, we've got sensory nerves, which are all different kinds of sensory nerves. For us, mostly what's important for this ANS is internal sense. And then you also have your five senses that you always think about: your sight, sound, or sight, hearing, taste, blah, blah, blah. Okay. And then you've got your information comes in, central nervous system makes calculations, sends information back out through motor nerves. So motor nerves, usually we think of in terms of the somatic nerves, telling your muscles to contract. But for today's lecture, mainly we're concerned about these autonomic nerves, which are, again, the nerves that are going to come out and make changes in your body to maintain your blood pressure as well as other things. Two different branches of the ANS. And in the thing I posted for you to read, the guy said something which it kind of struck me as odd because I never heard anyone say this before, but it's so true. We always talk about these like they're two opposing systems, but they're working together on the same job, which is maintaining your blood pressure. So you kind of think they're opposing because they're physiologically antagonizing each other, but they're working together for the same job. So your sympathetic system is your fight or flight, your exercise and postural changes. So this is what's going to increase your blood pressure, increase your blood flow, and get more oxygen out to your skeletal muscle so you can do things. Also, release more glucose, like everything you need to get going. And then parasympathetic is like the opposite. It's kind of like, I like to think of it as the yoga system. It's like when you're sitting quietly, relaxing, calming down. That's your parasympathetic nervous system slowing everything down for you. And you do this after a big meal to digest it, resting up, relaxation, and conserving energy. It's funny because when I was in grad school in the 80s, they told us everything about this and almost nothing about this, which is kind of the mindset of the 80s, the go 80s, go, 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 go. People weren't thinking much about how it was destroying their lives. Okay. Reflex arc. So how did most of all of the responses we get are in a reflex between stimuli and response. So you've got some physiological variable, which could be, body temperature, blood pressure, all kinds of things that goes in through your afferents, or that's picked up by the sensory neuron, which goes into your CNS through afferents. You get some kind of calculation going on, and the result then comes out through the efferents, which then affects the effector. So the effector is whatever organ is is being interacted with to change that parameter. So could be your arteries. Mostly we talk about arteries as the effector because you're contracting and relaxing arteries to change your blood pressure. But whatever parameter you're looking at, your effector organ would affect that. And then that brings you back into range, hopefully. But you'll always be getting feedback, and this system is constantly maintaining things within the right parameters, I guess. Okay, so I think I went through this already, but let's read it. Reflex arc for controlling arterial blood pressure, which is our most important thing here. Pressure is detected by afferents, and these are your baroreceptors, the last thing we'll talk about today. The baro means pressure, so these pressure receptors are right on your aortic arch, right where your systolic pressure is going to hit first, and also in your carotid arteries, because that, you're keeping proper blood flow to your brain is vital so you don't pass out. Pressure then is compared with some set point that's made in the CNS. What should your pressure be? And this is your medulla and, hang on a second, your medulla and your hypothalamus, which is right about here. So in the, oops, get back up. So in the, hello? Or okay, all right. So your medulla then is kind of the direct control, and the hypothalamus is more kind of like the super control on top of the direct control. So the hypothalamus is where the set point is, and the medulla does the job to get it done. Deviation between set point is measured and corrected. So this is happening in the medulla and the hypothalamus, and then you get adjustment of activity of the efferents supplying the effector organs. Okay, so that's your reflex loop. And what it does is control your heart rate, force of contraction, resistance of the arterioles. All those things are like the second-to-second control of blood pressure. We'll talk later about longer-term control of blood pressure, but in the short term, that's what's controlling it. Anatomically, if you guys know me at all, you know that I know very little about anatomy. I know what I have to know. So sympathetic and parasympathetic. Para means on either side, right? Just like in chemistry, para means you've got one here and you got one there. This is para-amino-benzoic acid. So the parasympathetic only comes out here in these cranial nerves and then these sacral nerves. And your most important parasympathetic nerve is vagus, which is your 10th cranial nerve. And I say it's most important because this connects to most of the things in your body. So heart, lungs, stomach, I'm not convinced, I don't know about that, but anyway, adrenal gland, liver, pancreas, small intestine, all of this stuff is all the vagus. Interesting historical sideline. Remember when way back we were talking about, I think we were talking about neurotransmitters or something. And I said the first person to prove that there were chemical messengers between nerves and effector organs was Otto Loewy. And what he did was take this vagus and take a heart out while including the vagus nerve. And he put this heart into a chamber with a solution, and he stimulated that vagus nerve. And when he did, he collected the solution and then dumped that solution onto a different heart and got the same response in the other heart. And he called the stuff that came out Vagerstoff. German guy, right? Vagerstoff. So, which basically means stuff coming from the vagus. Okay, but anyway, that's your parasympathetic anatomy. Your sympathetic anatomy then is everything in between. And you've got a lot of ganglia here close to your spinal cord. Ganglia is just a whole bunch of nerves together. One group of neurons are a ganglia. Okay, so here's our ganglia really close to the spinal cord. So that's another important anatomical thing about the ANS, your sympathetic neurons have got very short preganglionic fibers, and your parasympathetic have got really long preganglionic fibers. So the ganglia in the parasympathetic is going to be really close to the effector organ, whereas this is way out by the spinal cord. Another thing that's important here that you really need to know is these ganglia are all nicotinic receptors on the postganglionic side and acetylcholine as the neurotransmitter. So if you took my drugs class, you would know, and if you didn't, there's something wrong with you. No, I'm just kidding. If you took my drugs class, you know the nicotinic receptor is an ionotropic receptor, which means it's a channel, and acetylcholine opens sodium comes in. So this is very fast neurotransmission. And interestingly, both sides of the ANS have the same neurotransmitter and the same receptor in their ganglia. Okay. And then out here at the neuroeffector junction, on the sympathetic side, we have mostly norepinephrine. One exception I'll talk about in a second, but almost all sympathetic neurons at the effector junction release norepinephrine. So we've got adrenergic receptors over here, alpha and beta. And then acetylcholine is also released by the postganglionic nerves of the parasympathetic system. And we've got muscarinic receptors over here that receive that. So this is cholinergic and this is adrenergic. Important kind of adjectives that are used a lot, so make sure you know those. Okay, sympathetic, to sum up, preganglionic fibers are short and they release acetylcholine and have a nicotinic receptor in the postsynaptic cell. They've got long postganglionic fibers and they release norepinephrine, and these are going to be activating alpha and beta adrenergic receptors. The one exception is your sweat glands. Your sweat glands release acetylcholine. So that's the only sympathetic neuron that doesn't release norepinephrine. Parasympathetic then have the long preganglionic fibers and short postganglionic fibers. The ganglia have the same neurotransmission, acetylcholine nicotinic receptor, and the postganglionic fibers release acetylcholine, and they have muscarinic receptors. Okay, cholinergic receptors. So I want to talk about each of the receptors. Cholinergic receptors are two major, very different classes, your nicotinic and your muscarinic. The nicotinic, as I said, is a ionotropic receptor. It has 5 subunits that come together to form a pore, and the opening and closing of that pore is controlled by the binding of 2 acetylcholine molecules to it. Now here, first we'll talk about the neuromuscular junction. Excuse me. Just because it's pharmacology, it's not necessarily cardiovascular, but just so you know the pharmacology of that too. And the neuromuscular junction, the nicotinic receptors at the neuromuscular junction are a little bit different. There's some different subtypes of subunits in there. So the drugs that affect the skeletal muscle and the autonomic nervous system are going to be different. You've got an agonist here, succinylcholine, and you can see, where's my acetylcholine? Here's acetylcholine, right? Here's acetate, CH3 with an acid on it. And then you've got, choline is basically ethanol. This is ethanol, right? Carbon, hydrogen, alcohol here. And then you throw this choline group over here, which is a nitrogen with 4 methyl groups around it. So anytime you've got a quaternary nitrogen group, it's got a permanent positive charge. So that nitrogen is positive, and then you've got this acetate part over here. So that would be binding here and here. So here's succinylcholine, which is basically, let's see, this is kind of like acetate, and then this is kind of like acetate. So it's like let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. So you've got 4 carbons in a row, but it's like there's an acetate at either side, and each acetate then is esterified to a choline, okay, to a choline group. So this is kind of like you take 2 acetylcholines and you stick them together butt to butt. And that is going to activate the receptor because it's going to bind here and it's going to bind here. Now it binds because it's binding twice, so it's got twice as many binding sites as acetylcholine. It really sticks hard. So this succinylcholine, while we're calling it an agonist, actually acts as an antagonist. You get this thing called a depolarizing block. So when the nicotinic receptor is open for a long, long time, it inactivates. So now it's closed. So succinylcholine is technically an agonist at the nicotinic receptor, but it acts as a blocker because you get this depolarizing block when you use it. Antagonist, D-tubocurare, curarine. You probably know this. This is the it's the blow dart poison that somewhere in the Amazon, I don't know exactly where, but the indigenous people use this as a dart poison. It's just ingenious how these people come up with this. How did you know you could use that as a poison? And how did you know you weren't going to die when you ate the animal afterward? Thousands of years of evolution, you know? So that's really social evolution, not biological evolution, but, you know, cultural evolution, learning these things and passing them on. So here is curare. And if you look, here's your quaternary ammonium here. Here's another quaternary ammonium over here. So you can imagine this thing binding here and just covering that whole pore. So that's what curare does. It just binds on top of the pore and blocks it so nothing can get through. And a lot of times they'll use this in surgery because, you know, they put you to sleep with, you know, centrally acting drugs, but your body can still kind of jerk, and you don't want that happening during surgery. So they'll do a neuromuscular block with curare to keep your body calm while you're asleep. Okay, again, this is not cardiovascular though, so let's do the cardiovascular part. So autonomic ganglia, the agonist, there really is no agonist for this nicotinic receptor in the ganglia, which is probably good. I mean, nicotine's an agonist here. I guess you could call that an agonist, and that's part of the effect of smoking, is giving you this sympathetic and parasympathetic rush at the same time. But an important drug that we'll talk about a bit, not important clinically, but important kind of experimentally, is hexamethonium. So again, you can see this, you know, kind of choline here structure. So it's going to bind across and block that autonomic, we're going to block all autonomic ganglia. So we'll do an exercise later called hexamethonium man. What would happen if you didn't have an autonomic nervous system? So if you give a person this drug, that's basically what it does. It shuts your whole autonomic nervous system off, both sympathetic and parasympathetic. Okay, hexamethonium, remember that. Okay, neuroeffector junctions, cholinergic neurons of the PNS. You've got 5 different subtypes of muscarinic receptor. They fall into 2 classes. We'll talk about that shortly. And the 2 classes makes it easier to remember, fewer drugs, thank God. Okay, agonist at the muscarinic receptor. And the muscarinic receptor, if I didn't say it, is a 7-transmembrane receptor, the G protein coupled receptor. So very different from the nicotinic, which from an evolutionary sense kind of blows my mind. How do you have one neurotransmitter evolve with 2 very different receptors? I mean, if you look at the alpha receptor and the beta receptor, they're very similar, just a few amino acids different that make them interact differently. But this is like a 5 subunit ionotropic receptor versus a 1 subunit G protein coupled receptor. Is very evolutionarily strange in my opinion. But anyway, it's not about my opinion, it's about the facts, people. It's about the facts. Agonist for this is called carbachol. And again, if you think in terms of acetylcholine, this is kind of like acetate, except instead of a methyl group, it's got an NH2 group over here, and it's esterified to choline, so carbachol. And this is I don't think this is used clinically at all, except for possibly for eye exams, but it's a good experimental drug too. And then antagonists, atropine, one of the oldest drugs, one of the many old drugs. Atropine and scopolamine both are in, what is it, belladonna, which is a drug or poison depending on your dose. Mandrake root, Jimson weed, a whole bunch of plants in this one kind of class. Although you know me talk in taxonomy of plants, I don't know it, but one certain taxonomy of plants, I think they're called nightshades, make atropine or scopolamine. And atropine is an interesting drug. At the right dose, it can be an anesthetic, put you to sleep. At a higher dose, it kills you. At certain dose, at the right dose, it'll give you crazy hallucinations. Witches. Um, Herbalists would use this, to go on trips and see things and everything. Um, I say witches jokingly because there's a scene in Macbeth by the Roman Polanski version of Macbeth, which I think he did in the 70s, where there's all these naked women witches dancing around this big kettle and brewing something up. And it always reminds me of atropine for some reason. I don't know. So anyway, atropine, scopolamine. Um, why does this bind to the same receptor? I don't know. Probably here's your quaternary ammonium segment of it, and that helps it to bind. Although I don't know what this part of it's doing. It's very different from acetylcholine, but I don't know the structure of the binding site of the muscarinic receptor. So we're going to pretend I didn't talk about that. Okay. Cholinergic receptors, subtypes, M1, M2, M3, M4, M5. So the most important ones are the M3 and M2. Okay, salivary glands and stomach we're not that interested in. M4 and M5 are in the CNS. So M2 is in the heart. So we're talking SA node and also ventricles. And this is going to be linked to GI, the GI subunit, and decreasing cyclic AMP in those tissues and physiologically antagonizing the sympathetic system. The M3 then are in the bronchi, endothelium. I'll get back to that. Salivary and stomach again, GI tract, iris sphincter, and these go through the IP3 calcium system. So endothelium, earlier when we were talking about the endothelium with Robert Furchtgott, he was using carbachol to activate muscarinic receptors on the endothelium and producing relaxation, and he determined that the relaxation was because of that nitric oxide. And the way he got there, I don't know if I told this story or I tell my stories over and over again. The way he figured that out was, they were taking these rabbit ear arteries out and mounting them in a tissue bath and measuring contraction. And it's like when they put carbachol on, sometimes they get contraction, sometimes they get relaxation. What the hell is going on here? So it turned out what was going on is when they took that artery out, if they weren't really careful, they destroy that endothelium, and now you've got muscarinic receptors on the smooth muscle, and they cause contraction. But if you were really careful and you had intact endothelium, then the muscarinic receptors would activate IP3 calcium in the endothelial cells, release nitric oxide, relax the smooth muscle. So that's how we figure the whole system out, had to do with these muscarinic receptors here. And speaking of nitric oxide, if you read that, you should read that thing I posted up there. I learned this yesterday when I was reading that website, but some parasympathetic neurons will directly release nitric oxide. Crazy. Okay. Here is okay, so this is like a summary of that. You've got these, the odd muscarinics are activating phospholipase C and releasing calcium, and your even muscarinics are activating alpha I and increasing or decreasing. See, this is increasing. That's wrong. It's decreasing adenyl cyclase. I wish I had fixed that. That's definitely wrong. And I'm not sure about the calcium channels and MAP kinase. We're not going to worry about that right now. But I'm pretty sure decreasing adenyl cyclase. I missed that on the slide yesterday. Okay, that's your muscarinic side. We've had enough resting and digesting. Let's get to work, people. Adrenergic receptors. So you got your alpha and you got your beta. Now this is probably the most important part of autonomic pharmacology, is the drugs involved in controlling the sympathetic side, because the sympathetic side has got a lot more input into blood pressure than the parasympathetic side. In terms of parasympathetics, the vagus nerve innervates the heart. So you can slow down the heartbeat and slow down the contraction. That's going to bring blood pressure down. But the sympathetic side does that, the opposite of that in the heart, but also contracts the arteries and the veins. There's no parasympathetic input into the arteries and veins. So, most of the original adrenergic pharmacology in the 50s and 60s was trying to figure out how does your autonomic nervous system control blood pressure. And when they did figure that out, then they came up with blockers to bring high blood pressure down. So the beta blocker was like the first big antihypertensive drug, and it's still used today. The guy Black who came up with it won the Nobel Prize. Beta blockers are used a lot. So early autonomic pharmacology is all about the sympathetic nervous system. Okay, so we've got two different subtypes of the alpha receptor, and there are like subtypes of each of these two, but we don't care. So the main one we're interested in is your alpha 1. It's always hooked to IP3 calcium at neuroeffector junctions. And again, you got, I hate to say memorize, but you should memorize these drugs. It's pretty important. And alpha at, I'm sorry, this is wrong. Hold on one second. Escape. So agonists of the alpha 1 receptor are phenylephrine and oxymetazoline. So the only clinical use that I know of, like typically, I mean, you can use them if someone's in hypertensive crisis, but usually to bring blood pressure up. But typically they're going to use epinephrine for that. So the only real clinical use here is nasal sprays, because your sinuses also have alpha receptors. And when your sinuses, the tissues in your sinuses contract, they open up the nasal passage. And so that's what these drugs do. This oxymetazoline is just got a longer half-life than phenylephrine. This is like 2 or 3 hours, and this is like 12 hours. Okay. So that's your alpha agonists. Your antagonists, and there are lots of them, but I'm just going to use this one, prazosin. Prazosin is a alpha 1 selective antagonist. And that's kind of important because you really don't want to mess with the alpha 2s. We'll talk about in a second. Mainly if you want to decrease blood pressure, you want to hit those alpha 1s. So this is an alpha 1 antagonist, and by blocking those receptors, it'll bring your blood pressure down. The alpha 2 then, we've talked about already, it's always a presynaptic autoreceptor, and it decreases cyclic AMP. And by decreasing cyclic AMP, it decreases the calcium current, and you release less norepinephrine. So this is, that's the only place we find these. Alpha 2 agonists, so if you activate the alpha 2 receptors, you're going to decrease norepinephrine release. So again, that's going to bring blood pressure down. So these are drugs that are used a lot clinically. Clonidine, my dad was on that for a while, and methyldopa. And then the antagonist, Yohimbe, is from an African plant. It's another natural product, and this blocks those alpha 2 receptors, so you get stimulation from it. Your blood pressure goes up, but it's also centrally active, so you get really stimulated by it. Okay, and then you've got non-selective antagonists, which again, less important clinically because clinically you really only want to block the alpha 1, and you've got alpha 1 blockers. Why would you mess around with an alpha 2 blocker? But in terms of research, we use them a lot. So phentolamine is your competitive antagonist, and then phenoxybenzamine is your irreversible antagonist. So a few weeks ago when we were talking about spare receptors and use an irreversible antagonist to block it, the example I was using was norepinephrine, rabbit ear artery, phenoxybenzamine. Okay, so that's just reminding you of that's what we talked about then.
I have a question. For the alpha 2 receptors,
Yep.
do they lower the blood pressure by decreasing the amount of cyclic AMP receptors, or what do they do?
Yes, they lower blood pressure, by blocking, decreasing cyclic AMP in the presynaptic axon bulb, and that causes a decrease in calcium coming in during the action potential, so a decrease in neurotransmitter release. So
Both of them, the agonist and antagonists?
I'm sorry?
Both of them, the agonist and also the antagonist?
No, the agonist will decrease norepinephrine release, so decrease blood pressure. The antagonist will block the system,
okay.
So it'll increase blood pressure.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Okay. Please feel free to interrupt me. Okay, beta receptors, again, really important pharmacologically. And it's important to know the difference between beta 1 and beta 2. Could be vital because a non-specific blocker of both could cause a person a lot of trouble. So anyway, beta 1 receptors, these are the heart predominantly. We mainly think about this in terms of the heart. Hang on a second. I get into that later. I get into anatomical locations later. So let's just say beta 1 receptor linked to cyclic AMP, GS and cyclic AMP. Antagonists of the beta 1 receptor, metoprolol, atenolol. These are really important clinical drugs. Beta 1 agonist. So these are going to be blocking those beta 1 receptors, which is going to decrease your heart rate, decrease your cardiac output, decrease your blood pressure, and also protect your heart. So what they call it protecting, because your sympathetic nervous system is not going to make your blood pressure spike if you're on a beta blocker. It's going to stop the heart from having that sympathetic input. Excuse me. So those are your beta blockers, and they're used a lot clinically. Dobutamine then is an agonist, so this is going to stimulate your heart. Dobutamine's used in congestive heart failure or whenever you need to increase cardiac output. Usually, like in emergency situations, they give them dobutamine to get the heart going. Although often they use epinephrine too, although epinephrine's different, as we'll see. Okay, beta 2 receptors. Now these also increase cyclic AMP, and you've got agonist albuterol. Anyone? Let's see all your faces again, or just you don't have to show me your faces. Let's how about a quick chat? Anyone know what anyone use albuterol here besides me? What's albuterol used for?
For asthma? For asthma?
Yes. I took a hit this morning. I do. Mike does too. Yeah, I've got asthma too. Don't get the COVID, Mike. So yeah, albuterol is a beta 2 agonist. So you can guess where the beta 2s are. They're in the bronchi. Terbutaline is another one. Albuterol is probably the most common one. I mean, albuterol is everywhere. My grandmother used to say, all over like horse manure. That was funny back in the 30s. It was a joke. Okay. Antagonists, butoxamine, although, again, this is probably more of a research drug because you never really want to block your beta 2s. All you're going to do is constrict your bronchioles, and there's no good clinical reason to do that. You've got non-selective antagonists. Propranolol will block all beta receptors. And so getting back to Mike West's asthma and my asthma, if you need a beta blocker, right, to decrease your blood pressure or whatever, and you've got asthma, you can't use this drug because it will it'll give you, respiratory side effects that are not good. Isoproterenol is a non-selective beta agonist. You could also use this as an inhaler. I used to use epinephrine as an inhaler. Anything that's going to activate those beta 2s will relax your these things right here, the airways. I don't have nouns today. My nouns are gone today. I don't know what the deal is. Okay, so propranolol is a non-selective blocker. Isoproterenol, non-selective agonist. Notice too, I get a kick out of this. This when I took pharmacology back in the day, I used to say drugs that rhyme do the same thing. If you look at this, metoprolol, atenolol, propranolol, isoproterenol, they're all beta related. So That's one way to keep it in your head. Oops, hang on. Bada boom. Okay, so where are these receptors? Alpha receptors are in the arteries. IP3 calcium, they're causing contraction, like we saw last week. This increases blood pressure or redirects blood flow. So if all your arteries are contracting, we call that peripheral resistance, total peripheral resistance, TPR. We'll talk about that next week. So if your arteries contract, your blood pressure goes up. So that's one aspect, keeping your blood pressure at the right amount, but also redirecting blood flow. So if you've got an area that needs more blood flow and an area that needs less, you contract this one and you contract this one less, and then the blood flow will stop going here and will go over there. So redirecting blood flow is also an important part of your alpha-1 receptors. Also in the veins, and in the veins they cause contraction. So we'll talk about this again in our what I like to call cardiodynamic section, where we talk about control of blood pressure and stimulation and everything. Your veins have something like 70% of all the blood in your body. And that's because, your arteries have a high pressure, the blood's moving fast. Veins are low pressure, so the blood's moving slow. So it all kind of pools in the venous side. And so one way of stimulating your heart is your sympathetic nervous system will stimulate the alpha receptors, which will contract the veins. And when the veins contract, more blood comes back to the heart. We call that venous return. So again, we'll see that in probably the next lecture. So venous return then is controlled by the sympathetic nervous system by contracting those veins. So the eyes, again, are kind of ophthalmologically important as well as research-wise important. So if you put in an alpha agonist into your eye, your pupils will dilate. That's called mydriasis. And that's an interesting thing too in terms of your sympathetic nervous system response to seeing someone you find attractive. I probably talked about this before. I used the same stories over and over. But when you see someone you're attracted to, your sympathetic nervous system will turn on, and when it does, your pupils get big, and it makes you more attractive. When you see someone with big pupils, you're attracted to them. Believe it or not, it's kind of true. So you ever see like anime? They always have really big pupils. But anyway, so I'll talk about it again when we get to the muscarinic. So one way to get open eye things, pupils, is by alpha agonists. GI tract, decreasing motility. And then I want to come back to that because this is kind of important. Hair follicles, you got these little tiny smooth muscle that control the angle of the hair on your body. So when your sympathetic nervous system activates, your hairs stand up. And if you don't have hairs, just kind of the skin around it pumps up, and that's your goosebumps. Adipose tissue, okay. Alpha-1 receptors will cause glycogenolysis, breaking down glycogen, releasing glucose, and gluconeogenesis and lipolysis, so increasing the energy in your blood by pumping this stuff out. Beta receptors. Beta receptors then on the heart and some vasculature, especially the ones leading, I shouldn't say some vasculature, I should say and the vasculature. Sorry. This whole class is on a shoestring here. Okay, so heart and the vasculature leading to the skeletal muscle. And those receptors in the SA node cause positive chronotropy. Remember, we talked about the slope of that slow depolarization. In the AV node, positive, oh shoot. Damn it to hell. Dromotropy. Positive dromotropy. Ventricles, oh, damn it. No, I did not proofread this. Why would I proofread? I never make mistakes. Oof, damn it. Okay, so positive, where was I? Positive inotropy in the ventricles, making, increasing, remember the heart, the 5 different targets in the heart, phosphorylating them, causing a faster, stronger contraction. That's positive inotropy. And the vasculature leading to skeletal muscle, it's going to be relaxing those, cyclic AMP, relaxation of smooth muscle, and that increases blood flow to the smooth muscle. Beta 2 receptors then are in the coronary arteries, the bronchi, and in the liver. Coronary arteries dilation, and notice there's no parasympathetic contraction at all of the coronaries, because blood flow to the heart, you never want to shut that off, right? That's not a good thing. Bronchodilation, dilating them, and then again glycogenolysis and gluconeogenesis in the liver. So when I took this class way back in the day, where am I? The way I remember this, like, where are the receptors and what do they do? The way I memorized this was thinking about it in terms of the fight or flight response, right? Because that's what it does. What do you want to happen if you really, really need to increase your physical activity? Number one, you want your blood pressure up, right? Higher blood pressure during stressful times helps you to have more ability to direct blood flow where it needs to go. So you want your blood pressure to come up, so the blood really gets pumping and going. Veins, you want to contract to get more blood back to the heart, increasing cardiac output, more oxygen with more cardiac output. The eye, mydriasis, opening your eyes so you can see more. Hair follicles, if you were a furred animal, your hair would puff up and make you look bigger. And also if you were a cold animal, hair puffs up and traps more air between the hairs and keeps you a little warmer. So fight or flight, puffs you up, makes you look bigger or stronger. And then adipose tissue, you're releasing glucose and lipids and things, so you've got a lot of energy to fight or flee. Beta receptors, you want your heart going faster and stronger, again, increasing cardiac output. And you want to relax the skeletal muscles, to the arteries to your skeletal muscle. You want to get more blood to your skeletal muscles, but you want to get it away from your skin. So if we back up, these arteries contracting here are arteries to your skin, arteries to your GI tract, arteries to everything but your skeletal muscles. So you're shutting everything down or slowing everything down except your skeletal muscles. You're getting all your blood, all your oxygen out to your skeletal muscles, so you can counter the threat, let's say. So that's why that is, and that's really important. So make sure you know that. And we'll talk shortly, very, very shortly, about the difference between norepinephrine and epinephrine in terms of the blood flow like that. Okay, beta 2, oops, damn it. Beta 2, God damn you. Beta 2, I'm sorry. It's been a rough week. Beta 2 receptors. Hang on a second. Oh, shit. Okay, I'm gonna have to wrap this up pretty quick because I've got another Zoom I have to do at 10:30. Beta 2 receptors, coronary dilation. You want more oxygen to your heart in a stressful situation. And bronchodilation, increasing airflow to your lungs so you get more oxygen. Also, remember those alpha 1s in your nasal passage? You're going to stimulate those, open your nasal passages, again, getting more air. So fight or flight is all about more oxygen to your lungs, more oxygen to your heart, more oxygen to your blood to get it out to your skeletal muscle so you can respond. Okay, let me check something really quick because I think I may have another Zoom I have to do right now. There's a Zoom that I'm doing. It's like 10:30. Yeah, I have to go soon. It's a Zoom for recruiting students to Plattsburgh State for our fabulous pre-medical programs. So, okay, let's look at this. I'm not going to go through it because I don't have a lot of time. We can talk about it next time, but I would really, really, really like you guys to look at it. Maybe I'll put a quiz up on the online for you to do about this. What we're trying to talk about here is your norepinephrine has got a higher affinity for alpha receptors than beta receptors. So norepinephrine is going to activate alpha receptors a lot more than beta receptors. Epinephrine is the opposite. It's got a higher affinity for beta receptors than alpha receptors. And then isoproterenol, as we said, is a non-specific agonist of beta receptors. So look at these things. Heart rate, okay, direct SA node intervention. Blood pressure, which is both cardiac output and contracting the arteries. Peripheral resistance, which is all about contracting or relaxing the arteries. So these are your three different parameters we're looking at. Here we've got systolic pressure, and here's your diastolic pressure. And the difference between systolic and diastolic is called the pulse pressure. So I'm going to ask you some questions, and basically what I'm looking for is, what's the effect of norepinephrine on these three parameters? What's the effect of epinephrine? What's the effect of isoproterenol? And why? Why are you getting these responses with alpha, more alpha than beta, more beta than alpha, and just beta? Why are you getting these different responses? So I'll ask you a question about that on your quiz, and I think it's a pretty good exercise to go through. Here's another thing that this is extremely important, but I didn't have time to write it out myself in this PowerPoint yesterday. Things got crazy yesterday. Just to let you know, I'm here in Pennsylvania again because my dad's pretty close to the end right now, so I'm here to try and help him. So I didn't have time to do a whole lot yesterday. But anyway, this is like a 4-minute video on the baroreceptor reflex. So like I said earlier, baroreceptors are on your aortic arch and in your carotids, and these are taking, millisecond to millisecond measurements of your blood pressure. And this is about the reflex loop between that baroreceptor and the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, and how that controls blood pressure and blood flow. So, it's kind of ironic because typically I can't even fill up an hour and 45 minutes. Today I needed that time and didn't have it. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to let you go. I know you're all sad that you're going to get 20 minutes off today, but what I want you to do for this weekend is look over this slide and figure out what's going on here. Write it out yourself. Why is this happening? And then I'll send you a quiz and you can do that. And then go through this animation, 4 minutes, and it'll explain the baroreceptor response. Okay, can I see your faces real quick before we say goodbye? Okay, Dr. Quackenbush, you fell. You're back up. Okay. Okay, everybody happy? Noemi, I see your hair. It looks good. Looks better than Mike's. Okay. Gamellan, you just got up, Gamella, didn't you?
I did. 9:25.
Nice. I miss being 20. I do. Okay. Everyone happy? We all good for today? All right, we'll meet back here on Tuesday, and we'll talk about those last 2 slides some more and make sure everyone understands what's going on. And I think we're going to do hemodynamics next. I don't even know what's on the syllabus anymore. This is just bizarre. So anyway, talk to you again later, guys. Have a great weekend. Kiss your mom.